Paula opened the door to her home after an exhausting day at work, oblivious to the fact that her life was about to change drastically. Upon entering the living room, she noticed a letter on the table. Curiosity piqued, she picked it up, noting it was from her husband, João. The words on the page, written in hurried handwriting, cut through her heart like sharp blades. "Paula, I'm moving out of the house. I will be living with my lover, Sophia. I thank you for the years we spent together, but I don't love you anymore." Paula's hands trembled, and the letter slipped from her fingers, fluttering gently to the floor. A sob escaped her lips as she leaned against the wall, trying to process the sudden and overwhelming pain. 8 years of marriage, which had begun in their youth when they were both just 22 years old, now seemed to end in nothing but heartache and betrayal. Crying inconsolably, she hoped for a chance to understand better what was happening, or even an opportunity to save her marriage. However, her number was blocked, and the rejection only deepened her anguish. Desperate for answers, Paula got into her car and drove to her mother-in-law's house. She hoped to find some comfort or at least gain a better understanding of the situation through João's mother, a woman who had always treated Paula like a daughter. When she arrived, Paula was greeted with surprise. João's mother, with a look of concern, invited her in. "Are you all right?" asked her mother-in-law, immediately noticing Paula's emotional state. "João left me for another woman," Paula managed to say between sobs, handing the letter to her mother-in-law, who read it with an expression of shock and sadness. I didn't know things were this bad between you two. João only mentioned once that he wasn't happy, but I never imagined it would come to this," João's mother confessed, not knowing how to comfort her daughter-in-law. Feeling even more defeated, Paula had nowhere to go. She returned to her empty home, where the solitude of the walls seemed to echo her own pain. She continued trying to contact João, persistently calling until he finally answered. "João, why are you doing this? What did I do wrong?" Paula asked, her voice a mixture of pain and confusion. "Paula, it's not about you. I love someone else. That's all," João said coldly before hanging up the phone. Paula remained on the phone, listening to the silence after the line had been cut, João's words spinning in her mind. She spent the night wide awake, sitting on the couch, staring into nothingness. Tears flowed freely down her face, and every memory of her marriage, every moment they had shared, was now tinged with betrayal and loss. The pain of separation was overwhelming, and the uncertainty of a future without João terrified her. All Paula knew was that her life had irrevocably changed that day, and the path ahead seemed uncertain and frightening. Yet, in that moment of profound despair, she knew she would somehow have to find the strength to move forward, even when every part of her wanted to succumb to the consuming sadness. Paula woke the next morning after a restless and painful night. Her heart still ached from the discovery of the betrayal and the abrupt end of her relationship with João. Despite the emotional devastation, she knew she had responsibilities that could not be ignored. As a doctor, the lives of others depended on her capability and competence. So, she dressed and drove to the hospital, her workplace. Upon arrival, the hospital corridors seemed eerily quieter than usual. Paula's colleagues, noticing her arrival, exchanged concerned glances but chose to maintain a respectful silence. They observed her tired expression and the telltale signs of a sleepless night in her eyes, yet none approached her to ask or offer solace. This unusual atmosphere only added to the weight in her heart, making her feel even more isolated. As the day progressed, Paula attended to her patients with her usual competence, but her spirit was distant. Her mind occasionally wandered, questioning herself about João, about Sophia, and about the signs she might have missed along the way. During her break, one of her closer colleagues, a nurse she had always considered a friend, approached her with hesitation. "Paula, have you looked at Instagram today?" the nurse asked, her voice low, blending concern and curiosity. Paula, who hadn't had a moment to think about social media or anything other than her pain, shook her head. "No, I haven't." "Why?" Without saying more, the nurse took out her own phone and opened Instagram, handing it to Paula. There was Joao, embracing Sophia on a pristine beach, both smiling and dressed in swimwear. The idyllic backdrop made the scene even more painful for Paula. The image was a visual confirmation of her worst suspicions and fears. Paula stared at the picture, feeling a new wave of pain wash over her. She tried to maintain her composure, but tears began to fall involuntarily, tracing salty paths down her cheeks. She handed the phone back to the nurse. "I need to be alone for a moment," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. The nurse nodded, understanding Paula's need for privacy, and left the office, closing the door behind her. Alone, Paula allowed herself to cry openly, sobbing for what she felt was the definitive loss of her marriage and the man she thought she loved. In this moment of vulnerability, she began to reflect painfully on the reasons for their breakup. She questioned whether the fault was hers, wondering if she had somehow failed to be the perfect wife for Joao. The idea that Sophia might be somehow more suitable, more desirable, was a thought that tortured her broken heart. As the hours passed, Paula tried to pull herself together, knowing she still had responsibilities to fulfill, patients who needed her. But that day, her personal pain had invaded her professional space in a way she could never have anticipated. She knew the road ahead would be difficult and that recovering from such a betrayal would require not only time, but also a rebuilding of her self-esteem and confidence after the painful discovery of her husband Joao's affair. Paula found herself consumed by a torturous curiosity that drove her to constantly monitor both Joao and Sophia's social media profiles. Each photo, every update, fueled a corrosive mixture of anger and pain. Through her vigilant observations, she discovered that Sophia worked as a saleswoman in a shoe store. Armed with this information, Paula felt an irrational urge to confront her, to see the woman who had upended her world. On a cloudy day, Paula drove to the store where Sophia worked. As she entered, her heart pounded wildly, adrenaline mixing with an almost palpable rage. Sophia, unaware of who Paula was, approached with a professional smile. "Hello. Can I help you with anything today?" Sophia asked, her store uniform immaculate, her posture exuding trained cordiality. Paula examined her discreetly. She couldn't deny that Sophia was beautiful, perhaps even more so than herself. A wave of insecurity hit her, but she quickly repressed it, maintaining a neutral expression. "Yes, I'm looking for some pairs of shoes. Could you show me several models?" Paula requested, her voice trembling but resolute. Unaware of Paula's true intentions, Sophia nodded and began to show her some models. However, Paula wanted more than just to see the shoes. She wanted to test Sophia, to push her to her limits. "These are nice, but I'd like to see more options. Could you bring many more?" "Maybe 20 pairs, Paula said, forcing a smile. Sophia paused for a moment, her surprise barely hidden. She knew fulfilling such a request would take much longer than usual. "Of course, I'll need a moment to gather all of that for you," Sophia responded, trying to maintain her professional composure. As Sophia disappeared into the stockroom, Paula was left alone with her tumultuous thoughts. Her initial idea was to irritate Sophia, to make her feel a fraction of the discomfort Paula carried. However, as she waited, she began to question her own motivations. What would this really prove? How would it alleviate her pain? After about 30 minutes, Sophia returned with another employee, both carrying numerous boxes. But to their surprise, Paula was no longer there. In a last-minute impulse, Paula had left the store and run to her car, where her repressed emotions finally overflowed. Sitting in the car, tears flowed freely as sobs shook her body. The confusion was immense. Part of her wanted revenge. Another part simply wanted to understand and perhaps find a way to move forward. At that moment, she realized that trying to hurt Sophia wouldn't make her feel better, nor would it fix what was broken. Paula drove back home, feeling more lost than ever. The confrontation she had imagined would bring some form of relief only highlighted how disoriented she felt. The days following Joao's revelation of his affair and his request for a divorce were a tumultuous mix of emotions for Paula. Each passing day seemed to slightly dull the intensity of her pain, but the feeling of betrayal and abandonment was still deeply rooted. Paula was starting to adjust to her new reality, trying to find some semblance of normalcy in her daily routine, when a sudden knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Opening the door, Paula found herself face to face with a middle-aged man dressed in an impeccable suit. He introduced himself with a distant formality. "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Roberto, and I am the lawyer representing your husband, Joao. I am here to deliver and discuss the divorce papers," the lawyer said, extending a folder towards her. Paula stared at the folder, the finality of the situation hitting her like a wave. Still somewhat stunned by the sudden visit, Paula accepted the papers with a trembling hand. The reality that this wasn't just a nightmare began to solidify even more as she held the concrete documents. As she flipped through the papers, Paula discovered something that made her blood run cold. They had married under a regime of separate property. This meant that the house she loved so much, in which she had invested not only money but also dreams and memories, no longer belonged to her. Worse still, all the assets she had helped build over the years of their marriage were now formally transferred to Sofia. "I hope you understand that according to the established property regime, the house now belongs entirely to my client. We regret any inconvenience this may cause," said Roberto, his voice maintaining a neutral and professional tone. Paula slowly sat down on the sofa, the documents still in hand. She felt an immense emptiness, not just from the material loss, but from the way everything they had built together now seemed usurped by a stranger. The walls around her seemed to echo with memories of a life that no longer existed. She looked at the lawyer, her serene expression hiding the inner turmoil. "I don't care about the assets or the money, Roberto. I'm a doctor. I can sustain myself. But how could he do this? How could he transfer everything to her?" Paula asked, her voice breaking with the sadness of betrayal more than financial loss. Roberto, who had witnessed many divorces in his career, remained impassive, offering only a look of sympathy. "Matters of the heart, ma'am. Unfortunately, they are not always fair or logical." With a heavy sigh, Paula signed the divorce papers. She had no energy left to fight a battle she felt she had already lost in deeper ways. The lawyer thanked her, gathered the signed documents, and with a brief nod, bid farewell and left Paula alone in her now eerily silent living room. The door closed behind Roberto, and Paula remained seated, staring at the space where she once shared laughter and plans with Joao. Now, all that was left was the painful acceptance that the life she knew had irrevocably changed. After signing the divorce papers, Paula found herself forced to leave the house she had built with Joao. With a heavy heart, she gathered her belongings and moved into a luxurious apartment, trying to start a new chapter in her life. The apartment was aesthetically more beautiful than the house she had lived in with Joao, but to Paula, it felt empty and impersonal. Every day, the luxurious walls seemed to echo her loneliness and sadness, a constant reminder of what she had lost. The months dragged on, and despite the passage of time, Paula felt stagnant. Her life, once filled with love and companionship, was now reduced to work and moments of solitude. One day, driven by an inexplicable impulse, Paula decided to drive to the house where she had lived with Joao. Parking her car in front, she observed the life continuing inside those now unfamiliar walls. Through the window, she saw Joao embracing Sofia. The scene was like a punch, reviving the pain and betrayal she was trying to overcome. Memories of the good times they shared and how devoted she had been to her husband flooded her mind, and anger reignited in her chest, furious and feeling betrayed all over again. Paula sped away in her car and returned to her apartment, where the solitude awaited her. She knew that burying herself in work was a way to avoid confronting her emotions. She threw herself into her duties as a doctor, working incessantly to keep her mind occupied and not succumb to the sadness that threatened to overwhelm her. One particularly long night during a shift, a fellow doctor approached her urgently. "Paula, we have a case that only you can handle," he said, his voice filled with anxiety as he handed her a folder containing medical reports. Paula examined the documents, her face reflecting the gravity of the situation. The tests revealed a patient who had fallen down the stairs, resulting in a cranial fracture and a life-threatening clot. She was one of the few cranial surgery specialists at the hospital, and the complexity of the case demanded her full expertise. She looked at the doctor, her eyes resolute and focused. "Prepare the operating room. I'll be ready to operate in an hour," she instructed with the authority of someone who found not just distraction but purpose in her work. As she prepared for the surgery, Paula reflected on the irony of her situation. The skills she used to save the lives of strangers were the same that allowed her to remain emotionally stable. Deep down, she knew that dealing with her own emotional traumas would be a much more complicated operation than any surgical procedure she had ever performed. In the long night that promised to be a demanding shift, Paula readied herself for the emergency procedure. The tension in the hospital was palpable, with every doctor and nurse moving with the urgency that only life-or-death situations can provoke. With the dedication of a seasoned professional, Paula requested to see the patient before the surgery, a standard procedure that always helped her connect with the humanity of her work. However, upon entering the ward, the shock of what she found nearly made her stagger backward. There, lying on a hospital bed, was Sophia, with her head bandaged and a look of confusion in her eyes. Paula stood paralyzed for a moment, the air knocked out of her as she stared at the woman who had disrupted her marriage. Sophia, recognizing Paula, displayed an expression of recognition and, with visible effort, grasped Paula's arm. "Please, save my baby." Sophia's voice was weak but filled with urgency. Those words jolted Paula out of her initial shock. It was then that she noticed Sophia's prominent belly. She was pregnant. Paula felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. Not only had Sophia taken Joao from her, but she now carried his child. Something Joao had never wanted during his 8-year marriage to Paula. Stepping back from Sophia's bed, Paula took a deep breath, trying to control the storm of emotions threatening to engulf her. From the corridor, 2 doctors watched her, concerned for her well-being. "Paula, are you okay?" one of them asked, his voice tinged with worry. "Yes, I'm fine," she replied, though her voice betrayed the internal battle she was fighting. The other doctor intervened, noticing Paula's hesitation. "We can call another specialist for the surgery, but it will take time. The nearest specialist is in another state." Paula pondered for a moment, the reality that Sophia's and the baby's lives were in her hands weighing heavily on her. Despite the pain and betrayal, she knew she had an ethical duty she could not ignore. She was a doctor, trained and committed to saving lives regardless of personal circumstances. "No," Paula finally said, with a determined resolution. "I'll do it. I will do the surgery," Paula said firmly, her voice resolute. "We don't have time to waste." Returning to the operating room, Paula donned her surgical gear with steady hands, each meticulous movement driving away personal emotions and focusing entirely on her skill and knowledge. Sophia was prepped for surgery, and every second was crucial. In the OR, the air was thick with tension and concentration as Paula prepared for one of the most challenging procedures of her career. On the surgical table lay Sophia, unconscious and vulnerable, her life and that of her unborn baby depending on Paula's abilities. The complexity of the case tested Paula's nerves, a constant reminder of the weight of her responsibility. For a fleeting moment, a dark thought crossed Paula's mind. The surgery was incredibly intricate, and any mistake could have fatal consequences. Given the circumstances, an error might seem a twisted, albeit terrible, form of justice, a way to make Joao suffer as she had. But as quickly as the thought arose, it was dismissed. "You're not like that, Paula," she silently scolded herself, shocked at her own capacity to consider such an act. Shaking her head, Paula composed herself, took a deep breath, and focused on the task at hand. She vowed to do her best, not just as a doctor but as a human being, to ensure the safety of Sophia and her baby. Hours passed as Paula operated with meticulous precision. The silence of the room was broken only by the sound of surgical instruments and the occasional instructions she gave her team. At the end of the procedure, the immense relief of seeing that both Sophia and the baby were stable was overwhelming. The team, recognizing the success of the operation under such demanding circumstances, applauded Paula, a celebration of her professionalism and humanity. Exhausted, Paula left the operating room and found a quiet corner in the hospital corridor. Sitting down, she reflected on what had just happened. Despite the anger and pain she still felt towards Sophia, a tired but genuine smile crossed her face. She had done her best, remaining true to her principles and professional ethics. In the following days, Paula made a point of checking on Sophia's progress, who remained unconscious. During one of the checkups, as she examined the sutures to ensure the scar would be as discreet as possible, Paula noticed several burn scars on Sophia's back. The marks were old and deep, each telling a story of pain that Paula could only imagine. The discovery that João was not by Sophia's side during such a critical time as an emergency surgery struck Paula as odd. Despite everything, he had always claimed to love Sophia, making his absence even more incongruous and suspicious. Intrigued and concerned, Paula tried to contact João several times, but her calls went unanswered. Not knowing what else to do, she reached out to João's mother. "Hello, Dona Clara. It's Paula. I'm sorry to bother you, but do you know where João is? He hasn't been answering my calls, and Sophia, she had a severe accident," Paula said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He was admitted to the hospital yesterday," replied Dona Clara, her voice heavy with worry. Paula felt her heart tighten. Despite the anger and resentment she harbored towards João, the news of his hospitalization stirred genuine concern. She quickly said goodbye to Dona Clara, her mind racing with thoughts of what could have happened. Paula drove to the hospital where João was admitted. At the reception, she introduced herself as a friend of João, fearing that any mention of their complicated past might bring unnecessary embarrassment. After inquiring about João's room, she found Dona Clara in the corridor. "Paula, what are you doing here? How is Sophia?" asked her ex-mother-in-law, surprised and anxious. "I operated on Sophia today. She had a fall and was in critical condition, but now she's stable. It was a complicated surgery, but she and the baby are fine," Paula explained, trying to hide the fatigue in her voice. Dona Clara breathed a sigh of relief and, with teary eyes, said, "You are a great doctor, Paula. I'm so grateful that you were the one to care for her." With a brief nod, Paula continued her way to João's room. Entering, she found him pale and visibly weakened, a stark contrast to the energetic and confident man she once knew. João looked at Paula with a remorseful expression. "Paula, I'm sorry for what I did to you," he said in a frail voice. Paula approached the bed, curiosity and old pain mixing in her chest. "Why are you in the hospital, João? What happened?" João sighed, seeming to gather the strength to reveal a long-held secret. "I'm sick, Paula. I have a genetic disease that's progressing rapidly. The doctor gave me 3 years to live." The words fell like a heavy weight on Paula. She thought she no longer had feelings for João, but hearing his confession, tears began to roll down her face involuntarily. As Paula listened, João spoke with a tired voice, revealing layers of his past that she had never known. Sitting by his bedside, Paula felt a mix of surprise and compassion as she heard the story of a youthful love marked by tragedy and separation. "When I was younger, before I even met you, Paula, I was in love with Sophia. We were inseparable," João began, his gaze distant, lost in long-guarded memories. "Everyone thought we'd end up married one day." João described how both families got along well, how they liked him, and approved of the relationship. He then dove into the memory of a night that began as one of the most magical moments of his life and ended in disaster. At 18, inspired by a romantic film I had seen, I decided to surprise Sophia. My parents were out of town that weekend, so I organized a romantic candlelit dinner. João smiled briefly at the memory of the effort he put in. I wanted it to be perfect. I cooked for us, and she was really impressed with the ambience I had set up. Paula listened intently, observing the change in João's face as he relived those moments. After dinner, we watched a movie in the living room and ended up falling asleep on the couch. João continued in a low voice. But I made a terrible mistake. I forgot to extinguish one of the candles. During the night, the candle's flames spread to the tablecloth, then to the curtains and the walls. In no time, the house was on fire. Paula covered her mouth with her hand, horrified by the turn of events in the story. We woke up to the smell of smoke and tried to run out, but as we fled, a burning piece of wood fell on Sophia's back. João paused, swallowing hard. She suffered severe burns and was rushed to the hospital. João's eyes filled with tears as he relived the harrowing memory. As João recounted the consequences of the fire, Paula listened intently, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. Sophia's parents blamed me for the accident, João continued, his voice tinged with sorrow. They decided they didn't want her to have any contact with me. She was forced to move to another city. We still loved each other, but we lost touch. João sighed deeply, looking older and more worn than ever. I suffered a lot because of that. I thought I would never love anyone as much as I loved Sophia. Until I met you, Paula. Paula, still holding João's hand, felt tears streaming down her own cheeks. Despite all the suffering he had caused her, in that moment, she could only see a man who had also lost much, who had also been marked by pain and regret. João, I didn't know any of this, Paula murmured, her voice trembling. I never wanted things to end this way between us. I just wanted you to know that I really loved you in my own way, João replied, looking at her with a mixture of supplication and gratitude. His eyes were full of remorse and sadness as he continued to reveal the events that led to the collapse of their marriage. Sitting in a chair beside the hospital bed, Paula listened attentively to every word, adding complexity to her understanding of the situation. Some time ago, I ran into Sophia at the supermarket. It was the first time we had seen each other since the accident. We talked a little and exchanged contact information. João began, his voice low and hesitant. She was single and I was married to you. I truly loved you, Paula, but something in me was rekindled for Sophia at that moment. I fought against that feeling, tried to hide it. Paula remained silent, absorbing each confession. The initial shock was giving way to an attempt to understand João's motivations. After I received the diagnosis of my disease, everything changed, João continued, his expression heavy with deep emotional weight. The idea of mortality, of not having much time left, made me realize that I still loved Sophia, and I discovered that she also still loved me. It was as if suddenly all the certainties in my life were questioned. He paused, looking at Paula as if seeking some sign of understanding or forgiveness. I was ashamed, Paula, ashamed and cowardly. I loved you too, and didn't want to make you suffer. I couldn't face you with the truth, so I ended up writing that letter, João sighed, struggling for breath as he spoke. When I found out that Sophia was pregnant, I wanted to ensure a future for her and the baby, especially knowing I wouldn't be there to see them grow. She can barely make ends meet with her salary, which is why I decided to transfer all my assets to her name. Paula felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and unexpectedly, a hint of empathy. The situation was twisted and painful, but João's motivations, though flawed, were not malicious. I hope you can forgive me, Paula, he finished, his voice almost a whisper. For a long moment, Paula sat in silence, processing the magnitude of what João had shared. Finally, she found the words. João, she began softly, I don't know if I can forgive you right now. What you did hurt me deeply, but I can see that you've also been hurting. It's all so complicated. You made choices that have changed our lives forever, and it's hard to reconcile that." João looked at her with tear-filled eyes, nodding slightly. "But," Paula continued, "I do understand that you were trying to do what you thought was best, even if it was misguided. And for that, I can find some compassion." She squeezed his hand gently, a gesture of connection despite the pain. "I think," Paula said, her voice steadying, "that we both need time to heal from all of this. And maybe, in time, we can find some way to move forward." João nodded again, gratitude mingling with the sorrow in his eyes. As Paula stood to leave, she glanced back at him, the man who had once been her world, now a complex figure of love, pain, and regret. With a final look, she turned and walked out of the room, determined to find her own path to healing and to rediscover herself beyond the shadows of their shared past. To respond, Paula's voice was firm but not devoid of gentleness. "João, what you did was wrong on many levels. But as they say, you can't control who you love. It would also be wrong for you to be with me while loving another woman. I am still hurting, but now that I know the reasons, I believe I will recover one day." João listened, his eyes welling up with tears, recognizing Paula's generosity in trying to understand despite the emotional chaos he had caused. "Thank you, Paula, for everything, for your understanding even now," he said, gratitude evident in his voice. Paula nodded, feeling exhausted but somehow lighter. João's revelations did not erase the pain but offered a tortuous path toward understanding and perhaps, one day, forgiveness. There was much to process and perhaps new pains to face, but at that moment, she recognized that the complexity of human relationships often required more than black and white judgments of right and wrong. She informed João that Sophia was safe and recovering well. João's reaction was visceral. He tried to get up abruptly, insisting on seeing Sophia immediately. Paula gently held his shoulder and reassured him. "She will be fine," she said, holding João's gaze until she felt his tension ease. In the months that followed, life took unexpected turns for everyone involved. João, now aware of the severity of his condition, began to cherish each moment, living at home with Sophia and their newborn child. Sophia recovered not only physically but also emotionally. Her hair grew enough to cover the surgical scar, a visual reminder that faded as the strands masked the trauma. One day, when Sophia finally learned that it was Paula, João's ex-wife, who had performed her surgery, she was deeply moved and expressed her sincere gratitude. "Thank you, Paula, for everything you did for me. I didn't know who you were at that time," Sophia confessed during a visit, shame and gratitude mingling in her words. Paula, who had spent months processing her emotions and the tumultuous end of her marriage, responded with a kindness that even surprised herself. "You're welcome, Sophia. I did what any doctor would do," Paula said, realizing at that moment that the forgiveness she offered was not just for Sophia or João, but a crucial part of her own healing. As Paula healed her internal wounds, life presented her with a new chance at love. One afternoon, she met Axel, a German tourist who was visibly lost on the streets and spoke only German and English. With her proficiency in English, Paula approached to help. Axel was instantly captivated by her kindness and beauty, and that brief interaction turned into regular meetings during the rest of his stay in Brazil. After a few weeks, Axel, unable to ignore his feelings, asked Paula to be his girlfriend. Determined not to let distance separate them, he moved to Brazil, where he built a new life alongside Paula. "My home is wherever you are," he told her with a smile full of promises and future commitments. Paula still thought of João occasionally, reflecting on the twists and turns that had brought her to this new chapter. But now, she looked forward with hope, embracing the love and new beginnings that life had brought her way. Every now and then, Paula thought of João, but now it was with an emotional distance that only time and forgiveness could provide. She saw him as a friend, someone with whom she had shared a significant part of her life, but from whom she was now detached. Living with Axel, Paula discovered new joys and perspectives. Together, they explored life with a passion that was about rediscovering themselves as much as discovering each other. In Axel, Paula found not just a lover but a companion who respected and valued her in ways she had always desired. During one of her trips to Germany, Paula learned about an innovative treatment for Joao's disease. The results were remarkable and could extend the patient's life expectancy by up to 10 times. Paula called Joao while she watched Axel buying ice cream. When Joao answered, they both smiled, and Paula shared the exciting news about the treatment, explaining that it could allow Joao to live much longer, even giving him the chance to watch his son grow up and build a family. Joao looked at his son and cried. "Thank you, Paula. You have been an angel in my life," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Paula smiled and provided more details about the treatment that Joao would soon undergo. After hanging up, she looked up at the sky, realizing that everything that had happened was leading to greater happiness for everyone involved. As she took the ice cream Axel had brought her, Paula gazed at the sky, reflecting on the clouds moving slowly above. She pondered the twists and turns of her life, from the collapse of her marriage to finding new love with Axel and now helping Joao find hope amidst his own battle for life. Everything seemed to contribute to a tapestry of experiences that somehow brought deeper meaning to her existence. Noticing her thoughtful expression, Axel asked gently, "Is everything all right?" Paula turned to him with a soft smile and affirmed, "Yes, everything is more than all right. Sometimes life takes us down painful paths to show us how strong we can be and how happy we can become." As they walked back through the park, Paula felt a profound peace. She knew that despite all the challenges and past pains, every step she had taken had contributed to the well-being not only of herself but also of the people she had touched along the way.